presents Gremlins.
Hello and welcome to Two Guys One Game. This time round we're going to be taking a look at some of the games based on a movie series that I'm pretty surprised hasn't had a new entry since the whole revival of 80s movies, reboots, sequels and remakes. You've got to keep them out of bright light, don't get them wet and don't feed them after midnight. But more importantly, should you play their games? That's right, it is Gremlins. You know, just like it says on the title that you've already clicked on. Anyway, how about I shut the hell up and we take a brief look at some games.
Most unusual gift he ever got.
First up is Gremlins for the Atari. As it's an Atari game, there's not really too much to say about it. The game consists of two levels that basically repeat over and over, getting faster each time, eventually becoming so fast that it's basically impossible. The real goal is to get a high score, because it's Atari. You play as what I'm guessing is the shopkeeper from the movies, or at least it's just some old guy. The first stage sees you out on the street and for some reason a load of mogwai are jumping off the roof of your house, so you've got to go catch them. They move pretty fast and the controls here are actually quite twitchy, so it can be difficult. Thankfully you can let a lot of them fall. Any that you miss will turn into gremlins on stage 2. Here, when you make it to stage 2, you have a shooter stage, where gremlins descend from the top of the screen and you've got to shoot the bastards. This can be a lot harder than it looks, as you have to be very precise, and your character moves very fast, so lining him up can be an issue. If a gremlin reaches the bottom of the screen, it'll kick your ass and you'll lose a life. Graphically, the game actually looks pretty good for Atari. Yeah, it is basic, but you can tell what everything is meant to be. There's not really much in the way of animation, but the scrolling here is smooth enough, and aside from the twitchy controls, the whole thing is actually pretty fun. That's really all there is to the game. Again, it's Atari, so you just need to get a high score. This will keep you entertained for a few minutes, and if you like Atari and Gremlins, then you might as well give it a go. Gremlins 2, the new batch, was next for the NES, and thankfully it was made by Sunsoft, which is normally a good sign. Here you play as Gizmo and you set off across 5 treacherous levels, taking out those gremlin menaces. The game actually does a pretty decent job of following the plot of the movie, with some really good cutscenes between levels putting everything into context. The levels here are all loosely based on scenes from the movie, and of course they're filled with traps and enemies. Who knew that office blocks had so many bottomless pits and spikes all over the place? Thankfully, Gizmo is pretty nimble and he can defend himself with various weapons. You start with tomatoes and you throw them at enemies to kill them, but every stage gives you a new weapon at some point that tends to have a better range and a faster fire rate. And you'll need these because a lot of the different gremlins can be a pain in the ass to kill, and the bosses here especially can be very tough. Each enemy you kill drops a little orb thing which you can use as currency. Each level has a magic door that takes you to a shop where you can buy items to help you out. You can increase your total health, replenish your current health, buy extra lives, or make your weapon more powerful. There's also a handy balloon that you can get, which means if you fall in a pit, you don't lose any health or a life. You just use the balloon to float back up. These are very useful. The problem is though, is that you can only buy one item per level, and it only lasts until you die. So you might want to power up your weapon, but you only have one heart left. So you have to decide if you want to be stronger, but you're going to be risk getting killed. I guess this does add some tactics to the game and makes it more challenging, but I really would have loved to buy a couple of items per level. Ah well. The game is very short with only 5 stages. Each of those does have a couple of levels within it, and none of them are particularly long, but they are packed with hazards. Everything wants you dead, and there's some really tough jumps to make too. You definitely won't be beating it on your first try, especially as some of the enemy placement is actually quite cheap and very hard to avoid taking damage. The bosses too, like I mentioned, are tough and they take loads of hits. Thankfully there are passwords so you don't have to start from the beginning every time. The graphics and sound here are both very Sunsoft, which means they're great. There's a lot of detail and some good animation here. Sometimes with top-down games the perspective can be a pain in the ass, but here it didn't really cause me any issues. And yeah, the music is great, with excellent vibe that really suits the game. Overall, this is actually a surprisingly good movie licensed game. I highly recommend playing this one if you can. It looks great, plays great, and it gives you a good challenge. The Game Boy also got a version of Gremlins 2, but it's not just a monochrome version of the NES game. Instead, it's a platform game where, again, you play as Gizmo and you have to traverse a bunch of levels taking out gremlins and, of course, bats and rats. The game looks decent with some cool sprites. The gremlins especially look really good, but sadly, that's about the only good thing about this game. It's one of those ones that it's kind of hard to explain, but when you play it, everything just feels off. The controls are imprecise, making jumping very difficult, the hit detection is poor, and overall the game just kicks your ass. You start each level without a weapon, and you have to find one within the level, but sometimes you don't have one until about halfway through each stage, and by then you've had your ass kicked by the enemies that are very hard to avoid, and the bats that fly onto you, they just stick on you like little bastards, as well as the countless spikes that are all over the place as well, just to make your life a misery. There are boss fights here which can be pretty hard, but normally for the wrong reasons. Usually it's because you have to be so close to them to hit them, meaning you're going to take a lot of damage, but often if you do have enough health, you can just spam the attack button and you'll eventually win. Usually when I say something is cheap and hard, it means I'm about to have a good time, but here that isn't the case. It's a shame, because after the NES version I had high hopes for this, but it really just isn't fun to play. I don't recommend playing this one at all.
Gremlins the Adventure is one of those text adventures where you type in what you want to do and your character inevitably just tells you they don't know what you mean. Except in this one I did actually manage to get somewhere, and the game did actually understand what I was trying to tell it around half of the time. Now, it might be because I love the Gremlins franchise, but I actually had a bit of fun with this one, and I'm really not a fan of these sorts of games. The graphics here are pretty good, and they even have some animation in most of them, which isn't always common in these text adventures. The game does tell you what you can see without needing to be prompted, as well as letting you know where the exits are. This I appreciate, and the game also has the same sense of humour as the movies, giving you fun way to kill the little shits. Overall though, I did find that this is still a game that you'll only really enjoy if you're into this sort of game, and I did get bored and stuck after about 40 minutes. So if you like this sort of thing, I'd definitely say give it a go. It seems to be pretty close to the movie, and if you're a loser like me and don't have the patience for these games, maybe give it a miss, as it's not your only option for a Gremlins game on the C64. If action's your thing, then you've got Gremlins by Atari. It's a single screen action game where you have to collect all the Mogwai and get them into the cage in the top right of the screen. Meanwhile, you've got to avoid the Gremlins that will kill you if you touch them. There's water and food scattered around the levels too, and as we all know, if you feed them after midnight or get them wet, all sorts of havoc will be wreaked. Thankfully, you can pick these up too, so the Gremlins don't get the chance, or Mogwai I should say. Also, you happen to have a massive sword, which by the way is from a scene in the movie in case you weren't aware. This is pretty good at killing enemies, so make sure you swing it like a madman. The game looks decent enough, and it can get pretty challenging fairly quickly. Killing enemies can be tricky thanks to some dodgy collision detection, but you soon learn to live with it. You can only carry one Mogwai with you at any point in your backpack, so planning your route is crucial, though I found it was a good idea just to try and kill all the Gremlins at the start of the level and hope that the Mogwai don't eat the food or get wet while you're delivering the other ones to the cages. This tactic kind of worked pretty well for me for the most part. I really enjoyed playing this one, and I definitely would recommend giving it a go if you can.
Gremlins Unleashed for the Game Boy Color is another platform game where you play as Gizmo. Here the Gremlins are generally being their usual bastard selves, so you set out to get rid of them. Everything looks pretty good here actually, with some nice animation. The problem is that I never really knew what the hell I was meant to be doing. I wandered around a bunch of very large levels where Gremlins were hiding out all over the place. Thankfully you get a few weapons like a camera or a crossbow that you can use to kill them, and they both kind of work okay, but the hit detection here is terrible and you'll get hit loads before you have a chance to do anything. I'll be honest here, I never actually managed to get past the first level. I was wandering around for a good 20 minutes, and as far as I could tell, I'd collected every item and got rid of all the Gremlins, and nothing seemed to happen. You do also get to play as Spike the Gremlin, which sounds cool, but it's basically exactly the same, just with different sprites. When you're playing as Spike, there's no Gremlins attacking you of course, instead you've got to avoid hazards like lights and water, etc. The game is still no better though. I had no idea what I was meant to be doing with either character and just sort of wandered around aimlessly collecting stuff. So I did what any good gamer does, and I looked up some cheats. There are passwords for the game, so I looked them up to see if I could check out some of the later levels. You really don't need me to tell you not to bother playing this one. Gremlins Stripe vs Gizmo was released for the Game Boy Advance, and it looks and plays very similarly to the Game Boy Color one. However, it has seen some vast improvements just about everywhere, which is good. It's one of those games where you have to explore quite large levels and collect a certain number of items to be able to get to the next level. In this case, it's presents, and once you've found enough, you need to find the Christmas tree and then you'll put the presents there. Ain't that cute? Thankfully, unlike a lot of games like this, there's no time limit here, and also there's way more presents on each level than you actually need, so you don't have to find every single one, which is a blessing. You can choose to play as either Gizmo or Stripe, but it doesn't really make a difference. The game is exactly the same no matter who you choose, with the same levels and item placements. The only difference is that Gizmo is collecting presents to save them, whereas Stripe collects them to destroy them. The game actually looks really decent with some cool animation, especially when you're killing the Gremlins or Mogwai, and the game even controls well. The way the camera snaps around though makes you want to puke. It happens way too much and is so fast. This is another game where there isn't really that much to say about it. Each level basically plays the same: go and find the presents, then find the tree, rinse and repeat. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a bad game actually, it's just that it's kind of there. If you're a fan of Gremlins, it's fine and you'll get a few minutes enjoyment out of it, I guess. Gremlins 2, the new batch, was released for Amiga and DOS. This is the Amiga version. It's a great looking action platform game that is pretty much ruined instantly by some cheap, unfair difficulty, which is a real shame as it looks fantastic and the controls are actually pretty good. The issue is that you're instantly bombarded with enemies and can only take one hit, and it doesn't matter if you kill them, as they'll just keep on spawning, making it almost impossible to progress. Also, there's no point trying to take your time as you have a pretty strict time limit. You do get a few different weapons which can come in handy, but the fact that you'll spend most of your time dead and you lose the weapons when you die means you won't get to use them for long. It's a real shame, as in screenshots the game looks fantastic. It's just really no fun to play. Don't bother with this one. And finally, for this pretty short video, here's Gremlins Gizmo for the Nintendo Wii, or as I like to call it, Gremlins Shovelware. It's one of those games that I'm not really sure if it counts as an actual game. It's more of an activity centre, though there are mini games here that you can play, so yeah. Basically, you start off as Gizmo in the bedroom of the house, and you basically just point your cursor around the room, and when the hand glows green, you press A. Gizmo will then interact with whatever you've pressed on, and you'll get points or play a mini-game. Once you've got enough points, you'll unlock new rooms into the house, as well as new Mogwais who play as, and costumes to dress them up in. None of these things actually make a difference, it's all purely cosmetic, but, you know, at least it gives you something to do. Like I said, as well as interacting with the room, there are some very basic but incredibly exciting mini-games, like playing catch, colouring in, vacuuming, and driving laps around the house in a car. All the mini-games they control okay, most of which you just need to point at stuff on the screen and press A, though the driving section is very twitchy and a lot tougher than it should be. And yeah, when I said exciting, I did mean boring and easy. Granted, this is a game aimed at younger audience, to be fair, and they probably will enjoy seeing the hilarious animations of Gizmo falling off of stuff and other such hilarity, but for anyone over the age of 10, it's unlikely that it's going to appeal to them. Now the game actually looks alright, with some pretty good character models on there. There's gremlins that pop up every now and then, and you've got to point at them and press A to get rid of them. They look alright, but they've got that weird, strange, jerky animation that just looks really cheap. There's not much else to say about the sound and music, it's kind of relaxing, and the Mogwai makes some cute squeaks and grunts. Gizmo here and his mates are basically what you'd expect. So yeah, I mean, this is probably what you expected to hear for this game. It's a basic collection of mini-games where all you have to do is point and stuff until you've unlocked everything. I was kind of hoping for a 3D platformer, but let's be honest, it would have been below average at best. I've got a feeling this isn't a very common game, as it's actually quite expensive to buy these days, but to be honest, that's just another reason to avoid it. So there you go, a bunch of Gremlins games that we've played so you don't have to, though you should play the NES version, it's really good. Don't forget to subscribe, we upload new videos when we've made them, and of course you can follow me on Instagram, just search for The Reviews Brothers. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.